Last time we touched on regarding different ahadith on the era of peace. So this will happen after all of the wars, after the Dajjal, after the Mahdi, after Isa alayhi salam, after Yajuj and Majuj. Everything will be finished, and then the era of peace will start, where there'll be so much peace and so much fruits and luxuries that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will open up the earth towards the people at that time. And I mentioned here that after this happens, then there will be a certain soft type of wind that will come, or a breeze that will come, and this breeze will kill all of the believers. So all of the people that have Iman will now pass away. So after a certain amount of years, this breeze will come and it will kill all of the believers, and there will be no believers, no mu'mineen left on this dunya. And then there'll be a time when obviously now, because there's no mu'mins, because there's no believers, because there's no people saying Allah or La ilaha illallah, then there'll be a lot of corruption that will start the earth. Go back to idol worship, go back to different things, basically back to Jahiliyyah almost. And then Allah subhanahu wa also at the same time take away the Quran and everything which is to do with the name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Ibn Mas'ud radiallahu ta'ala mentioned regarding the lifting up of the Quran. He says, make sure you read the Quran before it gets taken away. So the people said, his students said, oh teacher, how can they be taken away? So Ibn Mas'ud radiallahu ta'ala mentions that a night will come, Quran will be taken away, nobody will remain who can recite a single verse of the Quran. And they will even forget La ilaha illallah. Even forget La ilaha illallah. They will speak the speech of Jahiliyyah. So this will be a time that will come. Muslim mentions another hadith. Anas bin Malik radiallahu ta'ala mentions that Qiyamah will not take place until no one says on earth Allah, Allah. So when we're saying Allah, Allah, then Qiyamah won't take place. But once that is taken away, then the Qiyamah will definitely take place after this. Hudhayfa bin Yaman radiallahu ta'ala, who is obviously a famous Sahabi about regarding those times which is to do with the Day of Judgment, or the signs leading up to the Day of Judgment, or the fitan and the trials and tribulation which is going to happen, and the predictions of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He knows more than anyone. He says Islam will be wiped away, just like a cloth is worn out. So you worn out, then you throw it away. No one will know what is siyam, what is salah, what is hajj, what is sadaqah. And one night, the Quran will be wiped away from this earth. It's gone. After one night, it's got completely finished. Only a small group of people, he mentions here, an elderly man and an elderly woman, and they will reminisce about a time where, yes, our forefathers, I remember they used to go and touch their head, like something similar to this. Our forefathers used to say, La ilaha illallah, but we don't know what it means. You'll say, we don't know what it means. We've heard our forefathers say something which is similar. Hudhayfa bin Yaman radiallahu ta'ala, so the student said to the teacher, oh Hudhayfa, what is the point of them just saying La ilaha illallah when they don't pray, they don't fast, they don't do sadaqah? So Hudhayfa turned away. He didn't want to answer the question. They asked him again, he turned away. 3 times he turned away, didn't want to answer the question. Then he goes, alright, let me address this. So he addresses his students, he says, oh student, the kalima will save them from the fire of hell. Meaning, even if you don't do any of these actions, eventually a person will leave Jahannam because he said La ilaha illallah. So this hadith shows that there is an entire generation after all of the mu'mineen pass away. There'll be an entire generation of people to come. So after that time, then there will be this Qiyamah will take place. So we find that sometimes we even see this nowadays. So example, you find that Muslims around the world, you find that they've moved from country to another country. They've moved from a Muslim country to a non-Muslim country. They've moved from a place where there was the environment of Islam, where maybe they got taught Islamic principles and Islamic teachings. But once they moved away, what happened is that that person who was brought up with Islamic teachings, they can still have their Iman, and they will probably still die on their Iman. But what happens, their children, when they come and they settle down there, their children, they might not be as religious because they didn't teach their children about regarding Islamic teachings. The environment wasn't there. So what will happen is that the level of Iman will slowly decrease by generation. So let's say 2 generations down the line, they'll say, yeah, I maybe saw my father or my mother, they used to go and kiss the ground, or they used to do some funny actions in the night time or the morning time, or they never used to eat for a certain month, or they used to open a book, but I've never seen it before, I've never read it before. This is the time that, from now, as in what we're seeing now, is still happening. Meaning through our own experiences and through our own what we're hearing from other places. I'll give you examples. The Muslims in Australia, so let's say 200 years ago in the 1800s, the Muslim in Australia, they were called by the government. They were called by the government of Australia to come and try to make a railway from the eastern side of Australia to the western side. And Australia is massive. And the whole of the middle of Australia is complete desert. And they wanted some sort of transport system for going for east and west. But they couldn't do it because it's really hot and it's really tiresome and they don't have the numbers to do it. So they called a Muslim from Afghanistan and so forth. And they said, come around and they will pay you and we'll give you this and we'll give you that and so forth. Build us a railway, build us a certain system. And they said, bring your camels along too. They said, bring your camels along too. So they brought the camels along too, and then they started to work on these areas in the middle of the desert, and they started to do this. What happened? They were people of shurwa, kameez, they had turbans on, they had beards, they had like full Afghani clothing. And they had their iman, and they had their, they wanted their salah, they couldn't do their salah for a while, they petitioned for their salah, and eventually they had a time for a break where they used to come and then perform their salah. So they had this is in the middle 1800s in Australia, in the outback, known as the outback, in the desert area. So eventually what happened is that over time, they married the local people. So what happened is that their sons came, or their daughters came, and then their daughters and their sons came, so their grandson or their grandchildren. And then after a while, because there was no environment, because the mixing of cultures, because one was non-Muslim, one was Muslim, one parent was Muslim, one parent was non-Muslim, one was Afghani, one was the local, one was the local people at that time. After generation and the next generation, what would happen is they would lose their iman. They would lose their iman. So much so that there was a very famous program on TV. And this program on TV used to go and make ancestry, genealogy, that who my fathers were, who my great father. So this white person came on, very famous white person. He came on and said, yeah, I'm checking who's going to be in my genealogy. How far does it go up? Literally, look at his grandfather, his great grandfather were Muslims, but he wasn't. He had a normal Muslim name. Sorry, he had a normal like an English name. So these are the people he mentioned here. These were Steve Waugh and Mark Waugh, the famous cricketers. It was there. They saw their fathers or the grandfathers or the great grandfathers. They had turbans on. They had shurwa kameez on. These are the people at that time, but they lost their iman. They lost their iman after a while. Why? Because there was no teachings given down to them. Even if you find the people of South America, when you find that those people in the Middle East, Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, they left those in the 50s. They left their areas in the Middle East and they went to Brazil, they went to Argentina, they went to Peru, Venezuela. Now you look at those people, they say, yeah, our forefathers used to say Allahu Akbar. They used to say La ilaha illallah. Now they don't have iman anymore. Why? Because there was no environment. They didn't teach their children regarding iman. They didn't teach their children regarding the teachings of Islam. Now what do you find? Now they say that, oh, I saw my forefathers do something like this, and they were doing a certain action, and they were, and so forth. This is how life was. And you look at America in itself. When you look at when the people came and so-called conquered America in the 1700s, they were Muslims on those ships. Who was guiding the ships? You need Christopher Columbus. There were lots of Muslims on those ships. Even when you look at the slave trade, they came from Africa and Senegal. There were lots of Muslims on those ships. So when they came to America, there was lots of Muslims on the lands of America. They came there off the boats and they came there. So what happened to their Islam? And he mentions here that after a while, generation after generation, what happened? They lost their iman. They lost their iman again. So why? Because there was no environment. There was no teachings of Islam. Do you find this in South America? You find this in South Africa, which happened as well. These are all where you find Islam was there and it was strong because they had the Islamic teachings and the Islamic background. But when they moved to a different country, what would happen? The same happened in the UK. In the 50s and the 60s, lots of people came and emigrated towards the UK. Many of us emigrated towards the UK, and they started a life here. What happened is there was a slight change. They realized what could happen in the other countries. What was the first thing they did? They petitioned for a mosque. They petitioned for scholars to come over. When the scholars came over, they taught the children Quran, the teachings of the Quran. They had mosques, and now the people can go and have mosque and they can pray. They used to do back in the 50s or so, they used to come and they used to pray Jum'ah on a Sunday. Now they made it that happened that the Jum'ah was actually on a Friday. So they worked over time. There's lots of education. They looked after not only themselves but the coming generation. So once they came, now they were, they had the language, and the scholars had the language, and now they safeguarded the iman of the progeny afterwards. That's how you're supposed to do it. And alhamdulillah, this is what we're seeing nowadays. We're seeing the fruits of their labor. Now we see masajid everywhere. We see institutions everywhere. Why? Because they made the effort upon their children and upon their progeny. But this hadith that is mentioned here, where he mentioned that there's going to be a time coming that when they'll say, an elderly man, an elderly woman, when they say the Quran is wiped off the earth, there'll be no more Muslims left. Oh yeah, my grandfather done this, or my grandmother used to be like this, and used to be like this. And this is happening in the Russian area as well. So in the communist area of Russia, where they weren't allowed to do anything. In Turkey, in the early 1900s, mid-1900s, they weren't allowed to practice Islam. The Quran was taken away in the Russian area. The Quran was taken away. They used to go to the mountains and then start reading Quran there. But if they were to find the Quran, they had to burn the Quran. And used to get persecuted for reading the Quran. And now what happened over the Balkan areas where you find Bosnia, Macedonia, now people are starting to get in the Islam back. But they lost a generation of Muslims. They lost a generation. But because they weren't allowed to practice Islam because of the regime they were under. So you find aspects of this hadith which happened over a while. But now, alhamdulillah, Islam is coming back in those areas, and is flourishing in those areas as well. So this was one of the predictions that's going to happen in the future. There's also another prediction which I wanted to cover is in Surah Isra. So Surah Isra talks about regarding very famous, the beginning of Surah Isra. It talks about regarding فَإِذَا جَاءَ وَعْدُ أُولَاهُمَا بَعَثْنَا عَلَيْكُمْ. It talks about regarding some ayats of the Quran and regarding what's going to happen, regarding the predictions of the Day of Judgment. So he mentions here some ayats of the Quran, and in these ayats of the Quran, some have interpreted slightly differently, and maybe because of in light of what's happening now, what could happen and what couldn't happen. So I'm going to go through a few ayats of the Quran. And in these ayats of the Quran, then we can try and see what's happening nowadays and see whether it's relevant or not. So in verse number 4 of Surah Isra, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions here, فَإِذَا جَاءَ وَعْدُ أُولَاهُمَا بَعَثْنَا عَلَيْكُمْ عِبَادًا لَنَا أُولِي بَأْسٍ شَدِيدٍ فَجَاسُوا خِلَالَ الدِّيَارِ وَكَانَ وَعْدًا مَفْعُولًا. So Allah says in verse number 4 that we conveyed and we decreed to Bani Israel in the Kitab, most likely Lawh Mahfuz, that you should cause fasad in this world twice, and you should reach a degree of great pride and haughtiness. Meaning, amongst the Bani Israel and that group, there will be two periods of power for them. Two periods of power for them. Allah then continues, ثُمَّ رَدَدْنَا لَكُمَ الْكَرَّةَ عَلَيْهِمْ وَأَمْدَدْنَاكُمْ بِأَمْوَالٍ وَبَنِينَ وَجَعَلْنَاكُمْ أَكْثَرَ نَفِيرًا. Verse number 5 mentions here that when the first of these two promises come, they will have a dominant era, the Bani Israel. And then we shall send against you our servants, who have great military might, and they will even go into your houses. This is a promise that took place. وَكَانَ وَعْدًا مَفْعُولًا. This is a promise that's already taken place. So this is another verse. Sorry. وَقَضَيْنَا إِلَى بَنِي إِسْرَائِيلَ فِي الْكِتَابِ لَتُفْسِدُنَّ فِي الْأَرْضِ مَرَّتَيْنِ وَلَتَعْلُنَّ عُلُوًّا كَبِيرًا. That's ayat number 4, sorry. Verse number 5, فَإِذَا جَاءَ وَعْدُ أُولَاهُمْ وَبَعَثْنَا عَلَيْكُمْ عِبَادًا لَنَا أُولِي بَأْسٍ شَدِيدٍ فَجَاسُوا خِلَالَ الدِّيَارِ وَكَانَ وَعْدًا مَفْعُولًا. These are the two ayats, okay? And he mentions here that two promises will come. First promise has already happened. The second promise is going to come, or it's already happened according to the different interpretations. The next ayat Allah mentions ثُمَّ رَدَدْنَا لَكُمَ الْكَرَّةَ عَلَيْهِمْ وَأَمْدَدْنَاكُمْ بِأَمْوَالٍ وَبَنِينَ وَجَعَلْنَاكُمْ أَكْثَرَ نَفِيرًا. Then we gave you back a new chance and we caused you to have a victory over your enemies. We gave you money and children, and we made you powerful in numbers. So again, this is another interpretation where I'm just translating for the moment. I'll come to the interpretations. Verse number 7 then mentions, In ahsantum ahsantum li anfusikum wa in asa'tum falaha. Then we gave, O Bani Israel, if you do good, then you do good for your own benefit, and if you do evil, then it will be against you. فَإِذَا جَاءَ وَعْدُ الْآخِرَةِ لِيَسُوءُوا وُجُوهَكُمْ وَلِيَدْخُلُوا الْمَسْجِدَ كَمَا دَخُلُوا أَوَّلَ مَرَّةٍ وَلِيُتَبِّرُوا مَا عَلَوْا تَتْبِيرًا. When the second promise and the era of dominance for the Bani Israel come, another group will cause your faces to become sour, and they shall enter the Masjid Aqsa, just like they entered it the previous time, and they'll destroy whatever is there. Ayat number 8 mentions, عَسَى رَبُّكُمْ أَن يَرْحَمَكُمْ وَإِنْ عُدْتُمْ عَدْنَا وَجَعَلْنَا جَهَنَّمَ لِلْكَافِرِينَ حَصِيرًا. Your Lord might have mercy on you, and if you go back to your evil ways, we will go back to punishing you. And we have made Jahannam a place for the disbelievers to reside in. These are Surah Isra. It's to do with regarding the Bani Israel. It's to do with regarding Aqsa and so forth. And these are certain promises. So what has the Mufassirin have mentioned regarding this? I'll mention this first. First of all, what are these two eras of dominance for the Bani Israel? These two eras have already taken place in the past. This is one interpretation. What are these two eras? Number one, he mentioned the Assyrian exile in 722 BC, where they came and they destroyed the Bani Israel and the Jews. Second time, 597 BC, with Bukhti Nasr, and this is the Babylonian exile where they came and they took over. This is one interpretation. They said that these two dominances of Bani Israel finished. Khalas, BC. Next one, another one is no. The first one is in the Babylonian times, when the Babylon came, Bukhti Nasr came and he took over. That was the first one where they got destroyed. And the second one is when the Romans came in 70 CE and they took over and they destroyed and exiled all the Bani Israel at that time. These are two. So these are the main ones which have been taken in the Mufassirin time. These are the two main ones, and this is the common one, and this is something which is mainstream. So I'll mention that inshallah. The last one I wanted to mention is something which is more modern because of what's happening now. So some scholars have said this. So I'm just saying that some scholars have said this interpretation. That the first one has taken place back in the past, and the second one hasn't happened yet. Second one hasn't happened yet. This is an interpretation. That this is a next wa'ada is going to happen, that they're going to enter the Masjid Aqsa, and the first promise as mentioned, كَانَ وَعْدًا مَفْعُولًا. This has already happened. But the second one, the second wa'ada, it doesn't mention that it's already happened already. Interpretations was there and so forth. But this is certain interpretations of what's going to happen, whether another one will happen or it's happened in the past. Mainstream view is happening in the past because all the Mufassirin, they wrote it for 500 years ago, 400 years ago, 300 years ago. But now looking at the recent events, some scholars have mentioned that maybe it's going to happen again, that they're going to go and then enter the masjid again, and then there will be a certain thing that will happen. And it mentions regarding, I'll mention the ayat where they go towards the second, فَإِذَا جَاءَ وَعْدُ الْآخِرَةِ لِيَسُوءُوا وُجُوهَكُمْ وَلِيَدْخُلُوا الْمَسْجِدَ كَمَا دَخُلُوهُ أَوَّلَ مَرَّةٍ. So this is the ayat, and the ayat is ayat number 7. So if I were to listen to this new interpretation, and then listen to this tarjuma. If you do good, then you do good for yourselves, and if you do evil, then it will be against you. When the second promise and era will come, another group will cause your faces to become sour, O Bani Israel, and they shall enter the masjid just like they entered it the previous time, and they will destroy it. So who is this another group? Again, we don't really know. But whether it's going to be another wa'da coming. Even if you look at one of the recent scholars of our time from Mauritania, I forgot his name. He also mentions here, it's got nothing to do with the Bani Israel. They're actually Muslims. Because this is only Muslims. Allah is talking to the Muslims. But the Muslims will come and they'll be taken over. And then some group will come over the Muslims and take over the Muslims. And then your face will be now in a certain way which is scowling, and you'll be embarrassed. So this could happen as well. And then Shaykh, I think Dadu, his name is, very famous one. So he's mentioned regarding that this is to do with the Muslims, not Bani Israel. The Muslims will be embarrassed and humiliated, and another group will come and take over the Masjid just like they take over the first time. So there was a first time before in the past, and now the second time will come very soon. So there's different interpretation what's going to happen, whether it's to do with this Quranic ayat or not. Allah knows best, but the mainstream view is already happened in the past, and then the Romans or the Babylonians and so forth, they have taken this. But in recent events, some have tried to interpret it and mention regarding these things. I thought I'd mention this because somebody came up to me a couple of days ago and was asking regarding this. So I thought I'll mention regarding these ayats of the Quran, and mention it in regarding to the wa'das and the promises and the signs of the Day of Judgment. Someone also asked me regarding another one with regarding the destruction of the red camel. No, not red camel. Red cow. Thank you. So inshallah I'll try and mention something with this in the coming days as well. But these are all different aspects of the Day of Judgment, or the signs of the Day of Judgment. And then hopefully inshallah this is beneficial for us, so we become aware of what's going to happen, and then you'll find clarity of what is yamizul khabitha min at-tayyib, which is evil, which is good, which is pure, which is impure. And then we find, and this is what's happening nowadays, and what's happening with recent events from October onwards. We realize whose side everyone is on. We realize whose side everyone is on. It becomes clear for us, and this is a so-called benefit, is that people, we know which side everybody is on, and then it makes things clear in our minds and so forth. So we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make it such that we are protected from any kind of fitness that's going to come our way, protection for ourselves and protection for our progeny as well, regarding this hadith that I mentioned regarding Hudayfa and then the people of the past. Bless Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for forgiveness, for guidance, and for acceptance of all our worship and our du'as. Subhanallah bihamdihi, subhanallah bihamdik, nashhadu an la ilaha illa anta nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk. Inshallah, if everyone can make their way to the tent, inshallah, and then we can break our fast there, inshallah. Keep making dua in these special moments, inshallah, and try not to waste any food or water while eating there at the dastakhan, inshallah. Jazakallah khair.